Welcome to our Shield of the Sun video. This is Bruce Lee and the Martial Arts Part 6. If you haven't watched the other ones, please go back and watch them so you know where we're at. And so after he watched the show, he called his Hollywood agent and he fired this agent and stated that he was now officially quitting Hollywood. Lee resumed his martial arts studies and managing his schools. Soon he had so many teachers and students that he decided to give himself more time into his studies and to only directly train his celebrity students who he had a kinship with, like Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, just to name a few, and to which some of them filmed the training sessions they had with Lee. During this time, a terrible event happened to Bruce Lee and his family. One day, Lee received a call from his brother, who informed him that their father is dead. Lee had to fly back to Hong Kong to bury his father in the family graveyard. Lee was close to his father. Even in a spiritual way, he knew that something was wrong about his father's sudden death. Prior investigations show that Lee's father was murdered by the Triads. This is the reason why he was murdered. Bruce Lee had no intentions of going back to Hong Kong, for his life and career was already established in California, so there was no need to seek a life in Hong Kong. But the Triads now had an agenda in doing Satan's will. Satan wanted Lee back in Hong Kong to become a Chinese Hong Kong movie star. Satan knew that the time to poison the worldwide audience with martial arts had arrived, and instead of Hollywood being the vehicle to hustle and promote this destructive art, the Hong Kong studio would have this so-called honor, where they were about to make millions of dollars off of Bruce Lee. But in order to get Lee to quickly return to Hong Kong to sell him on the idea, the Triads, who were done using Lee's father, ended up poisoning him, which killed him. This caused Lee to quickly return as planned. The doctors told Lee that his father died of old age, even though his 64 is not even retirement age. Lee was kind to them because he did not want to upset his family, but he also knew they were lying. Lee had a way of knowing when someone was hiding something. Lee's heart then became very, very afraid. An old fear that he thought was being suppressed was starting to rise up again, and now Lee was heartbroken with grief and torn by an unknown fear of impending doom regarding himself. He could feel that Satan was behind all this, that Satan wanted him, and he was going to get him, and there was nothing he can do about it. Lee could feel that this demon, this watcher, who haunts him and possesses him, is somehow behind this, and something awful was coming his way. But Lee could not see the big picture. He could not see the evils he was involved in, and how his own beliefs were blinding him from the truth of the one true Jesus Christ. Bruce Lee did not fully understand how Satan snares people by their own personal weaknesses. Lee was definitely in trouble, and the snare waiting in the wings was a trap that Lee thought would be a dream come true. Satan is very crafty and clever indeed. On the day Lee buried his father at the graveyard, his heart was heavy and broken. His emotions he could not control. He broke down at the foot of his father's grave and mourned and cried in a most heartbreaking fashion. He wanted this curse to stop. He wanted his father back, and for this nightmare called life to end. He wanted it to end so badly. After his father's funeral, when Lee was at the family home, Satan sent his agents from the Hollywood studios with kind smiles. This man knocked on the door with another Hong Kong producer and a director as well. When Lee answered the door, the three men bowed low to the ground toward him, and from the ground they expressed how honored they were to be in his presence, and they expressed much sorrow for the passing of his father. Lee then wanted to know who they are, and then they rose and explained to Lee that they come from the Hong Kong film studio, and that they came to offer Lee a contract that would make Lee millions of dollars in gross and salary earnings if he would agree to become a leading male star of the Hong Kong film industry. The contract not only gave him more earnings through the films he makes, but he would also be their top paid salary man, and he would have full creative control over all of his movie projects, from the direction style to the editing. Lee at first found this hard to believe, and he did not see any profit in it, because as he thought, he was unknown in the Hong Kong film industry, for he had not worked it since he was a child, and that experience scared him. But the producers told Lee that he already was famous in Hong Kong, and also in Japan, Korea, and the rest of China. It turned out that the show The Green Hornet When it was picked up on Asian television, it became a #1 hit show and one of the most popular shows in Asia. Also, they did not call the show The Green Hornet in Asia. They actually called it The Kato Show, after Bruce's character, and they even switched the name billing on the show, making Bruce Lee's name first. In fact, the full title was The Kato Show starring Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee had no idea that this was the case, and he wanted to know more. The next day, the three men picked him up and took him to the Hong Kong studios to show him clips of fan reactions toward his TV show, into which the fans were floored with him. After they sold Bruce on the total idea, Bruce was indeed impressed and felt that finally his dream of being a lead film star was here, but Satan was in fact the guiding hand behind it. Lee then signed on to the Hong Kong film studio and agreed to work for them. The studio bought Lee Hong Kong suburban home on Cumberland Road, and they picked up the bill to fly his entire family to Hong Kong, in which by now at this time Lee had 2 children. One was a son named Brandon Lee and a daughter named Shannon Lee. These children were born to Lee during his Green Hornet days, just right before he entered Hollywood as a great martial art guru. Lee at first always made it a point to spend time and play with his children, who he loved very, very much. He also was their first teacher in martial arts and education in general. Lee's kids were known to have a very joyful spirit that was contagious in a good way. In fact, the reason why Linda and her mother reconciled was because of Brandon Lee, Bruce's firstborn. It turned out that Brandon's racist grandmother was really envious when Linda gave birth to Brandon. She one day showed up at the home of the Lee family, and Linda opened the door. When she saw it was her mother, she looked at her and remembered her words of yellow babies, and then without saying a word, she slammed the door. Bruce had a strong sense of family being together regardless of personal feelings, for he personally saw too many families break up over personal issues. Bruce then did a selfless act so that Brandon could also have his grandmother in his life, and his wife could somehow reconcile with her mother. When she slammed the door, her mother started to walk away, but Bruce reopened the door and called to her respectfully and said to her that someone wants to see you. When she entered, she saw Brandon in a crib, and she was totally touched by the sight of him, that she started to cry because of how beautiful he looked. Linda's mother had a very huge change of heart that day, and she did regret her words. Now Lee's entire family is with them in Hong Kong, as Lee prepares to become a worldwide star that was going to eventually corrupt him, put him through violent, hellish fights, try to seduce him, and eventually kill him. But not before he spreads martial arts like hamburgers to be enjoyed, and later to pay for it with your very life all over the world. When Lee got started, the Triads immediately kept a much closer watch on Lee and his family. They put their people in as crew members, extras, and cast members on his films. They watched him from behind the scenes of his company, as they were the ones who really own and run the Hong Kong film studios. Bruce actually worked for them, and he didn't even know it. The producers Bruce worked with were either Triads themselves, or they secretly answered to them. Some of the people working as employees on Bruce's estate in Hong Kong were Triad spies, keeping tabs on Lee's family. These spies also followed and tailed Lee and his family. Lee could always feel that something was wrong with the scene at times, and so could his family, but they could not fully see just how watched they were. They could only sense it. Lee had other problems as well in Hong Kong that became even bigger problems when he got famous in Hong Kong. He was continually being challenged by martial art fighters who came from schools that Lee supposedly offended by teaching secrets to non-Chinese, and fighters who personally were jealous and hateful of him, and fighters who wanted to make a name for themselves. These fighters did all kinds of crazy and twisted things to get Lee's attention to fight them. When they came calling, they yelled profane insults at him and his late father. They insulted his art and manhood. They insulted his American wife and kids. They threw things at him. They threw objects through his home windows. They vandalized his personal property, like his car or front gate. They tried to sabotage his movies by causing dangerous set accidents or dangerous occurrences. They would break or crash into a set to personally challenge Lee. They would even jump the front gate of Lee's home where his wife and children lived, just to challenge him. Lee's life throughout the Hong Kong film star career was filled with violence and fear. At first, when these things would happen, Lee would fight the challenger, and usually quickly defeat him, or just defeat him. But soon, especially after his first 2 films, these occurrences got out of control, and soon Lee called in his students, the masters from his schools, to come and work for him as his personal bodyguards for himself and his family. Most of these men were Americans who were black, white, Latin, Asian, and other cultures, who became a source of comfort for Lee and his family. They often protected and guarded the Lee family against these crazed martial artists, but sometimes one of them will do or say something so personal that Lee's demonic nature would come out, and Lee would take up the challenge and, as usual, defeat his opponent. Many of these bodyguards of Lee appeared as villains or extras or guys fighting on Lee's side throughout many of Lee's films. Lee's demonic hauntings and attacks also got worse during his film star days in Hong Kong. Many times Lee was found in rooms where he was passed out on the floor, sometimes injured, and always looking pale and frightened by something. There would be objects in the room like dressers, tables, picture frames, lamps, etc., tossed about the room in a violent fashion, with windows oddly wide open. When Bruce was found like this, he often played it off like nothing was wrong, and he would even blame himself for the mess, but personal friends and servants knew better. Many times the demons conducted poltergeist activity on Bruce Lee. During Bruce Lee's film career in Hong Kong, his martial arts skills were at the top peak of clearly supernatural ability and physical human prime skill of a level beyond the greatest athletes of the world. There was no one on planet Earth that could match him in anything on a physical athletic level. Bruce Lee could beat anyone anywhere in the world, and he was truly the most complete warrior in the last 1,000 years. But these skills were not completely of his own, but also of Satan himself, who gave Lee his supernatural strength and agility. Bruce was clearly suffering for his art, and only a change of faith to Jesus Christ was the only way to end it. But Lee was not seeing that at the time. When Lee first went to work on his first film, the Hong Kong writers gave Lee the idea for the film, The Big Boss, which later got renamed in America, Fist of Fury. Lee took this story and made it better, giving it a Hollywood-type look and feel, but set in a Hong Kong setting. The story was also very different from other Hong Kong films in terms of look and how the scenes were carried out, and how the film was edited. These innovative changes came from the mind of Bruce Lee. All the martial arts scenes were actually choreographed and directed by Bruce Lee. Some of the martial artists who worked in Lee's films recall strange things as they were doing the martial arts scenes. They felt at times that a strange presence was there with Lee as Lee got into character. The shrills and growls and roars sounded frightful and nerve-wracking to the senses of the other martial art actors. Oftentimes they didn't even know where the sounds were coming from, and it often really scared them and gave them cold sweats after working with Lee. There were guys who would hear these sounds and see Lee coming to do a martial art move, and they would run for their lives off the set. Actual grown men, martial art fighters, running off the set like children, I kid you not. Many times these fighters themselves felt like their bodies were controlled in a way, while working fight scenes with Bruce Lee. To Bruce Lee's credit, however, aside from spiritually scaring the minds of his co-workers, he never once knowingly or accidentally injured a participant with his skill, and he was very hard on those who did, for he took personal injury very seriously.